Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be talking about the third and final chapter in the original Savage Dragon miniseries with Savage Dragon number 3. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in December of 1992, we can see here on the cover that the dragon will be doing battle this issue with a member of Youngblood, surprisingly, as we can see he and Bedrock, who is in December of 92 still being referred to as Bedrock, are going to be coming to blows with one another. It's a little bit surprising, but it all makes sense once we get inside. Eric Larson, creator, writer, artist, inker. Chris Eliopoulos, letterer. Gregory Wright, colorist. Janie Wong, editor. On the very first page of the story, we get this super cool full-page splash image of the supervillain Inferno, who is making his debut appearance, smashing through a large plate-glass window, fully engulfed in fire, ablaze, ready to wreak havoc, screaming, "Die at the hands of Inferno." Unfortunately, he's going to face one major issue in trying to do battle with Savage Dragon. That problem, of course, being the fact that the Savage Dragon is pretty much immune to fire, which is the basis of all of Inferno's powers, as we see him trying to attack the dragon when he feels he's most vulnerable in his hospital bed, still trying to recover from the events of issue 2. He's blasting, I guess, plasma fire burst is what it looks like, as Dragon seems capable of leaping out of the way as he jumps into the fray. Also, this is the first time we get a good look at Dragon's feet, and we see that he, like a Ninja Turtle, has only 2 toes. And Inferno was blasting through the window because the door was guarded by the Chicago PD, namely Officers Wilde and Darling, who we have met in other issues. And it's just a big, giant, just complete cluster of a mess as we see Officer Wilde exclaim, "Oh no, not again," which would lead us to believe that there have been multiple attempts on Dragon's life while he was trying to recover from the injuries he suffered before. Dragon, in one motion, manages to dodge Inferno's attacks and also launch himself across the hospital room like a missile, blasting Inferno's head directly into the wall and in one shot taking him out. We then see Frank Darling enter the room and exclaim, "It seems like you're back on your feet," which would imply that up until this point, Dragon was still unconscious, which only makes it more impressive that on a moment's notice, without skipping a beat, he was able to just one-shot a supervillain that busted into his hospital room. He then pulls Inferno's head out of the wall and hands him off to the police, saying, "He's all yours, boys," and then proceeds to ask Frank Darling how long he's been out for. Darling informs him that he's been unconscious for about 9 days. He asks what happened to the supervillains at the mall. Darling informs him that the villain known as Basher had a hole blown through his head the size of a softball, and that they were able to catch and apprehend both Mako and Hellraiser, who are now in custody and expected to make a full recovery from the injuries that they suffered at the hands of Super Patriot. Officer Wilde then informs Dragon that Super Patriot got up under his own power and left the scene, but it seemed very odd and almost as if Super Patriot was under remote control and not even conscious when he walked off. Dragon seems a little perplexed by all of this, but he realizes that he doesn't have time to worry about this kind of stuff as he's got to gather himself and get back to work for the Chicago PD. Darling confirms Dragon's opinions as he states that having Dragon out of commission for the past 9 days has been very difficult for the Chicago PD, as the supervillains of Chicago have been running amok and in fact have killed several members of the police department in that time span. We also see that Darling explains to Dragon that the villain known as Skullface, who was presumed to be responsible for blowing up the warehouse, who or which belonged to Frank's cousin Freddie that Dragon was working for, and also presumed to be one of the people responsible for killing Freddie, has been released due to lack of evidence. However, the accomplice that he was working with, known as Hardware, has been kept in captivity since he was witnessed making actual threats against Dragon's life, so they were able to hold him on that. But Darling believes that the vicious circle has managed to get to the judge involved in this case and is very worried that their reach is in all parts of the city, including the higher levels of the criminal justice system and the police department. Then we also see Officer Wilde tell Dragon that he really scared the hell out of her. However, he just kind of smirks and says, "Well, I never knew you cared so much." Across town in another part of the city, we see inside of a large monumental skyscraper a conversation happening between none other than Overlord and Cyberdata, as Overlord is scolding a member of Cyberdata who, or basically for failing to hold up his end of a bargain that they had made. Apparently, the entire moment at the mall involving Basher, Hellraiser, and Mako was all orchestrated by Overlord because he felt they were becoming too ambitious and was apparently concerned that they may try to challenge his authority. So when he sent them to the mall to lure out Dragon, he also was working with Cyberdata behind the scenes to let them know where to send Super Patriot, because he believed Super Patriot would end up killing all four of them in one fell swoop and getting all of this mess out of his hair. However, Dragon, of course, was able to stop Super Patriot from just murdering all of them, and he is now very upset that Cyberdata has failed him and states that he never wants to see them again in the city of Chicago, and also that if it weren't for the times they had worked together successfully in the past, he'd be taking care of Cyberdata himself. He then states that, he's going to take matters into his own hands going forward, as we see that he is very confident and tells Cyberdata that they're very lucky not to incur the wrath of Overlord. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, we see Dragon getting ready to leave the hospital and go back onto duty, when he is interrupted by none other than Amanda Mills. Now, if you're wondering who Amanda Mills is, so was I. I believe she is actually the woman he saved from the hostage situation at the end of issue number 1, when he broke into the house and started, shooting up the place, and was also aided by the likes of Star. He's surprised at her presence. She explains that she never got a chance to properly thank him before, as she continues to get closer, kind of dangling her hand around his belt line, as she then grabs his tie and pulls him in, apparently trying to give him a kiss, when they are interrupted by none other than Nurse Stevens, who we also met in the first issue, as she was the nurse kind of in charge of overseeing Dragon's recovery when they first found him. She asks if she's interrupting anything. He tells her no, that Miss Mills was just leaving. She then asks Dragon what that was all about, and he simply states that it was hostage negotiations. She gets a laugh out of this, and he then asks what she needs in this moment. She states that she was actually rather worried when Dragon came in, as his injuries were incredibly severe, and that she was the one who was present for the care of Mighty Man when he died. This was also something that was talked about in an earlier issue. If you haven't seen my episodes on issues 1 and 2 of Savage Dragon, you probably should before watching all of this one, because there's a lot of things that are talked about that happened in those issues, and this is a continuing narrative, so it makes a little more sense to watch it all in order. She states that it was very difficult on her seeing Mighty Man die, as he did come in as his normal old man self, not as the superhero version that he transforms into. But that it was just sad to see what had been done to him when people realized what his true identity was, and villains just attacked him and beat him to death, essentially, to the point where he couldn't recover. She then states how worried she was when Dragon came in nearly the same state and just didn't really feel like she could go through having to witness that again. Dragon realizes that she is visibly shaken by everything that she's witnessed, so he gives her a hug and basically states that everything's going to be okay, just trying to really, deal with the fact that, his presence in Chicago does mean things to people, even if he's not, everyday, close friends with these people, that, there are people out there who are truly worried for his safety. We then see Dragon walking towards the front doors of the hospital along with Darling as the two of them are conversing. Darling letting Dragon know that even he was somewhat worried about Dragon's condition when he first entered the hospital. And, despite the fact that Darling was aware of Dragon's incredible healing abilities, he wasn't even sure if he was going to pull through. He also lets Dragon know that the Chicago media has worked itself into a frenzy in his absence, and that every reporter in town is waiting outside to get a statement from him, which Dragon is not too happy about, as he's not really fond of the spotlight. When he steps out the front door, he is just bombarded with questions from the local media, who are all trying to figure out, how he's feeling, when he'll be returning to work. Is it possible for him to clean up the city, and whether or not he'll be, arresting the leader of the vicious circle. Dragon tells them to just, slow it down, bring it down to one at a time. They continue to ask these questions. Dragon states that the only time that he'll be going after the leader of the vicious circle is when they have enough evidence to convict him and put him in prison. He also states that he's actually feeling great and ready to return to work, but they're also a little surprised by this and are also asking questions about his amnesia, which apparently has become public knowledge at this point, and why they should trust an amnesiac to, keep them safe from the villainy of the city. He states that, he's dealing with his amnesia one day at a time, but this is not interfering with his work with the police department at all. But then they also start to get into some weird conspiracy theory stuff, as they believe that there's a possibility that he's trying to hide things and that his amnesia isn't real. They ask if he himself was a criminal or a murderer or a child molester. He, of course, gets very angry at this line of questioning, stating that he's fine, there's nothing wrong with his ability, and that he's not going to entertain these wild conspiracy theories, and that he's done with the interview. One reporter tries to follow him as he walks off through the bushes, as she apologizes for the behavior of her colleagues, but Dragon's not in the mood for it. She asks if she can just get a few questions in, as we see her just uttering pleas, trying to get this interview. Unfortunately, the two of them are about to be interrupted in a very big way. That interruption, of course, coming from none other than the Boy of Stone himself, Bedrock, the muscle member of Youngblood, as he just leaps in and sucker punches the Dragon right in the face and exclaims he knew he'd find him, and is actually a little disappointed as he thought that Dragon looked much bigger on TV and is worried that this isn't going to be a challenging battle whatsoever. Of course, no one was expecting this, as we see that the reporter exclaims, "Oh my God," and Dragon is just knocked off of his feet by what I can only assume is a rather powerful punch coming from Bedrock. None of this really seems to make sense at all, and everyone is just standing around, jaws agape, trying to figure out exactly what is happening. We then see Bedrock standing over Dragon, who is still trying to figure out what exactly is going on, as Bedrock begins to insult him, asking him if he's got, or what the fin on his head is, and if he's some kind of alien, and that he's the weirdest looking police officer he's ever seen, but then tells him to get up and show him what he's made of. Dragon, of course, is happy to oblige, as he says, "Let me demonstrate, punk," as he lunges forward and punches Bedrock directly in the gut, and then catches him with a huge right hook that sends Bedrock flying through the air over the bushes. However, the Boy of Stone is not to be taken out so easily, as he then jumps out from behind the bushes, lunging through the air and tackling the dragon, as this battle is just heating up. The two of them crash through the wall of a nearby building as the battle is just raging on. Bedrock exclaiming that Dragon's in big trouble. Dragon, of course, says, yeah, right. They continue to slide across the floor and smash through the door of an elevator, falling down the elevator shaft as Dragon is able to regain his mobility and kicks Bedrock square in the jaw, and says that he never really cared for the pretty boys in spandex in the first place. We then see the last coupon in the Image Comics number 0 scam that I have talked about in other videos that I've made. This is the final issue of all of the different comics that had these coupons in them. So now that I've gotten to this, I will be making a video on Image Comics number 0 and going into a deeper explanation of how big of a scam this actually was, especially when we get into exactly what Image Comics number 0 is, but that's all for another video. We then see the reverse side of the Image Comics number 0 order form and coupon, and we then see an advertisement for the Savage Dragon versus Savage Megaton Man one-shot in the Bout to Knock the Other Guy Out. I have to dig through my collection to see if I have this one-shot. I may, but I'm not certain if I do. If I do, I will make a video on it, though. We are then once again treated to another cool fold-out mini poster of the Savage Dragon. This has been really neat that every single issue of this mini-series has a fold-out mini poster inside of it. I think this is actually something that was really cool of Eric to do and give a little bit of extra value to the readers, especially considering that, you know, these books weren't necessarily coming out on a monthly basis. This is a nice little, you know, cherry on top of like, hey, thanks for being patient. Here's a cool poster for you. We then see an advertisement for Comic Shop News, which literally was just a weekly publication that was, you know, news about the comic book industry that was carried in comic book stores around the US. As we get back into the story, we see the two heroes continuing to fall down the elevator shaft as the battle rages on. You know, Dragon continuing to basically yell at Bedrock for what he believes is the commercialization of what should be a more altruistic venture, stating that, you know, beating the crap out of Bedrock is going to be his pleasure. However, Bedrock goes on the counteroffensive and also states that, you know, Youngblood has saved the world on numerous occasions, and that, you know, they're not only doing good deeds, but that they're also role models, and that their action figures are selling tons and tons of units, and that Dragon is just mad because nobody wants to license his stupid fin head. He then states that, you know, they're heroes who are renowned across the world, and that, you know, they're doing a great job in terms of, you know, not just saving the planet, but also marketability and, you know, trying to set positive examples for kids all over. We then are shown what I feel is really kind of odd in terms of the way it breaks up the action. The images and panels from the end of Spawn issue number 4. If you'd like to know more about Spawn, feel free to check out my Spawn playlist. This is what I find really odd about it. Number one, this really kind of doesn't fit in the story, as we see Spawn disguising himself in a trench coat and walking down the street as two kids say, hey, look, there's that new superhero. Let's go take a look. Spawn is surprised and states, how did they know? This is not a reprint of those panels from that book. What I believe is happening is that Eric Larson actually took the time to look at all of the panels that Todd drew and then redraw them himself. I've held the two issues side by side and really examined it, and it's incredibly similar. And Eric does a very good job of copying Todd's style and also, basically recreating the panels perfectly and also copying most of the speech, but not the exact wording of the thought bubbles. It's odd that he would go to so much work of trying to, redo these panels in his own style for a bit that doesn't seem to really fit along with the action that's going on currently at this point in the book. As we turn the page, we continue to see the panels from the end of Spawn number 4. Once again, not entirely a one-to-one perfect copy, but incredibly similar, until we get to this panel here as we see Spawn walking away from the two boys who are infatuated with the images that they see on the televisions in the electronics store, all covering the Savage Dragon. This panel is specific to this book and does not exist anywhere in Spawn number 4. We then get back into the action, which I'm not sure why we got away from it in the first place, as that we see Bedrock state that he's going to rip the Savage Dragon in half, as we see that he is considerably larger than Dragon and has both of Dragon's hands in his grasp. He then, for whatever reason, instead of ripping Dragon in half, decides to throw Dragon through another set of elevator doors as we see Dragon go flying through the air. He then is able to right himself in midair, catch himself on the wall as we see Bedrock charge forward, ready to strike with his next attack. However, he's not fast enough as Dragon leaps over him, does a full flip, and kicks him in the back as he's about to land, which is a really cool move, and I like the way that Eric drew these panels to show the motion of Dragon's abilities while Bedrock himself is remaining stationary. We then see Bedrock blast through the side of the building and fall into what is almost certainly Lake Michigan. Dragon looks out through the hole in the wall and states, "I hope you can swim, punk." However, he then seems to be a little bit worried that perhaps Bedrock cannot swim and he doesn't want this man to die, especially considering he's a member of Youngblood. So he decides to jump into the lake after him and save him. However, underneath the surface of the water, he finds out that Bedrock was indeed just playing possum as Bedrock once again continues his attack, landing another punch on Dragon. However, Dragon seems to be really quite capable at fighting underwater as he very quickly turns the tables on Bedrock, punching him in the face, and then continuing to pummel him all the way until the point where Bedrock is above him, and then he lands one more super huge punch. We then see Bedrock burst through the surface of the lake, flying back into the city as Dragon leaps out of the water himself, giving chase as he flies through the air and tackles Bedrock once again. Bedrock tries to right himself and continue his attack. We then get another interruption into the action as we are teleported to the home of an elderly woman who sees Dragon's face on the TV and believes that it is actually her dead son, Rodney, who we see pictured right here. This is a story element that comes into play later on, but it's the only point at which we see any reference to it in this issue. Once again, it seems a little odd to break up the action in this way, but at least this part, plays a role going forward. As the battle seems to be continuing, Bedrock suddenly states that he wants the battle to end, that he's telling Dragon to slow down, to lay off, to finally just stop, he's done. Dragon then states, all right, fine, I've stopped, but what the hell was that all about? Bedrock states that he'll make it simple for him, that he was just trying to see if he was tough enough to become a member of Youngblood. We're then treated with this really cool 2-page action splash image as Dragon, upon hearing this explanation, becomes infuriated and decks Bedrock with a huge haymaker, sending him flying as we see just a burst of energy as there's just all kinds of pavement flying off the streets, and we get the giant comic book wham as the action is finally coming to an end. Dragon then jumps on top of Bedrock, who's flat on his back, and yells at him, stating that's the stupidest thing he's ever heard. But Bedrock retorts, stating that that sort of thing happens in Marvel Comics all the time. However, Dragon quickly rebukes him, stating that, he can't believe that Bedrock just jumped out of nowhere, challenged him to a fight, and caused thousands of dollars in property damage, all just to see if Dragon was tough enough to join what he states is their little pajama party. He says that Bedrock needs to get a clue. Bedrock states that he's sorry and asks if he can leave. However, Dragon states, hell no, you're under arrest, as he pulls out his badge. This is actually just a funny little dig that Eric takes at Marvel, but does bring up and illustrate the pure lunacy that a superhero would just arbitrarily start fighting another superhero to see how tough they were and cause all sorts of damage to the surrounding area and put the lives of people in danger just so they could be like, oh, how tough are you? Instead of just, asking them or potentially, challenging them to a formal fight in a secluded area that isn't going to put the safety of anyone else at risk. It is a funny way of addressing that trope. Later on, we see Dragon approaching his door to his apartment as he has apparently gotten a change of clothes from the police station after he dropped off Bedrock. And he finds Debbie curled up asleep in front of his door. She wakes up. He asks her what she's doing. She states that her mom locked her out of their apartment and asks if she can spend the night on Dragon's couch. Dragon states that, he can go talk to her mom for her and that they can sort this out. But Debbie just asks if she can please just stay with him instead, please. Dragon sort of relentingly gives in as he takes her hand and helps her to her feet and states that it's okay, she can stay with him as we see the door close. Meanwhile, back at the police department, we see none other than Shaft and Die Hard have bailed Bedrock out of jail as Shaft kind of reiterates the sentiment that Dragon had, stating that this was a bad idea and that Bedrock is going to have to pay for all the damage he caused. Keep in mind, the members of Youngblood do all right for themselves as they're all employed by the government, and while government jobs typically don't pay the greatest, I believe they're making somewhat of an exception for the Youngblood team and that they may be getting residuals off of all the merchandising line. Die Hard also agrees with Shaft and states that Bedrock should have been more careful, although I feel like the two of them should have been a lot harder on him and just basically told him how dumb his plan was. We are then teleported to the bedroom of Frank Darling, who is awoken by a ringing telephone next to his bed. He answers the phone to hear a very ominous voice on the other side saying that he must have wanted the Green Man on the force pretty bad if he was willing to sell out his own cousin. He then gets angry and asks who this is. The voice then says that it seems the tip about his cousin Fred's warehouse being ripe for the plucking came straight from him. Darling tries to refute that claim, saying that, you don't know what you're talking about. And then the voice continues stating that, yes, the Green Man, or yes, you do, the Green Man you wanted the Green Man to be a police officer and that you made the call. We have the phone records. The bad guys threatened Fred. The Green Man sent them to jail. And then Fred's warehouse exploded. Freddy's dead and Dragon's a cop. Darling then realizes that they've got him dead to rights and they know absolutely what he did in trying to get the dragon to join the police department, though I don't know if he ever planned on Fred's death. Uh, he then asks the ominous voice on the other side, "What do you want?" And we then see that the person calling him was in fact Skullface, who just says, "Sleep well, Frankie," as he hangs up the phone. We then see that Overlord is standing right next to him, exclaiming that Skullface has done a great job and that Lieutenant Frank Darling is now theirs and that the Green Man is history, as we see Frank sitting in his bed, awake, not able to sleep, and realizing that the chickens have come home to roost and that he's in some real trouble now that his plan has been discovered. We then get an advertisement for Bow and Board, which is a place that you could order original art through, also some trading cards and toys, that kind of stuff. And we then see the first page of the letter section for the Savage Dragon comic. Some of the letters are just your standard fare of congratulating Eric and saying that they really like the book, but some of them are a little bit more interesting. As the letter section continues on the next page, we find out that one writer wanted to know, or one reader, I should say, wanted to know how much Dragon weighs. Apparently, he's 450 pounds, which means he is a very dense boy for his size. Also, one person points out, and I can't believe I never noticed this before, but they're entirely right, that Eric never uses speech bubbles in the Savage Dragon comic. And he said that he did this on purpose as a means of creating more mystery, but also that he doesn't really want the reader to know exactly what all the characters are thinking. He wants their emotions to be portrayed through his artwork, and that he only wants the readers to know, as much as each character knows in terms of what other characters are conveying, only through their speech bubbles, which I think is a really cool and unique way to handle the writing of a book, in terms of not letting the readers know everything there is to know in terms of all of the characters' thoughts. And he then later goes on into a really long explanation, trying to explain why all of the Image books were always behind schedule in this first year of Image, and basically stating that it had to do with the fact that they were trying to get the company up and running, and also for the fact that they were all having to create their own worlds from scratch, and that they weren't able to draw on already existing characters the way that they did when they worked for other companies, that part is kind of a lame excuse in my opinion. I understand his point that they were creating entire worlds from scratch. However, if that was the case, you could have just come up with the basic premise that you were trying to get started with and use that for a mini series before you got into the ongoing series. That way you could have had the mini series done before you started with the ongoing series and had a buffer to work with before you had to get the first issues of the ongoing series out onto shelves. Now, to be fair, the idea of starting a company from scratch is a little more work, but again, you could have had all this done before you went to print instead of trying to do it as you were trying to go to print. That way you weren't having these huge gaps between the release of issues. But, hindsight is 2020, and, I don't know exactly what they were all up against when they were starting Image, so maybe this was the best way they could have gone about it, but it doesn't seem like it. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Black Cat, but not Black Cat from Spider-Man. No, this is just a independent superhero named Black Cat that I know absolutely nothing about. If you know anything about this book or this character, feel free to talk about it in the comment section below, because I would actually like to know more about this character and what this comic was about, because, as I stated, it's a complete anomaly to me. I know nothing about it. And that was Savage Dragon number 3 and the conclusion of the original Savage Dragon miniseries. Overall, I think this is a fantastic book, and more importantly, a fantastic miniseries. Of all of the early Image miniseries that were released, I far and away find Savage Dragon to be the most compelling and the most well done from a narrative standpoint. Eric does a great job of establishing the world for Savage Dragon and also creating an air of mystery that wants to make you keep reading while at the same time setting up future plot points and really establishing the motivations for not only the dragon but also for other characters while not introducing more characters than he absolutely had to. This is one of the problems that you see with other miniseries from that time. For instance, Wildcats, which was just a narrative mess to read. There's so much exposition and so many characters are trying to be introduced all at once. There's tons of jumping back and forth between different locations. You never really get a real feel for what's going on in that narrative, and it's just very hard to follow at times. It feels like a real jumbled mess, and I really feel like Eric did a much better job of, making sure that, he introduced all of the characters he needed to while at the same time keeping it to a minimum, and also, just really solidifying what the character and world of Savage Dragon was in, only 3 issues, and doing a great job of really building hype for what would go on to become a very long-running, ongoing series that still, as I'm recording this video, is continuing to this day. But again, these are just my opinions. Your opinions may vary, and if you don't like Savage Dragon, I understand. It's not for everybody. But it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.